Good morning, everybody. Here we are on the second to the last day of Sesshin. That went fast. It always does, especially toward the end. So the other day, I had a dream, and actually David was in the dream. We were cooking. Our Tenzo has been working so hard. I've been watching her. Well, David and I both had frying pans and we're cooking. I happened to be cooking some chicken thighs, and David was cooking something vegetarian. It looked kind of like lasagna, but it was in a frying pan. And I felt a little bad that I was, cooking chicken, because I think David is a vegetarian. I'm not sure, but I think so, yeah. And I felt a little bad that I was cooking chicken next to his, But anyway, so he said in the dream, we'll wait for Alpida. Yeah. I've been kind of following my dreams in the last 10 weeks of this grief project, because Dr. Jack Miller, who's a psychologist, he has done some work in Jungian therapy too, which works with dreams. So I've been really interested in that. I have always been interested in my dreams. I don't always remember them, but when I do, I like to kind of think about them, not sure what they mean a lot of the time. But I have been enjoying that part very much, because I think dreams have a lot to tell us. It's our unconscious, maybe, telling us something. So in the dream, David is cooking up something vegetarian, and he says, sometimes I put comfrey in my cooking. The body gets very present after it's eaten that. So I remembered that. And so I thought, that's interesting when I woke up. Comfrey. I haven't thought of comfrey for a long time, but I did a little bit of research about comfrey because I thought, oh, maybe it has a lot of calcium in it, because I just discovered I have osteoporosis of my hips. So I thought maybe it has a lot of comfrey. And so I looked it up, and interesting, comfrey has a long taproot that goes deep into the earth. And so what it does, it brings up nutrients. So it's a very nutrient-rich plant. It's called a dynamic accumulator, actually, in agriculture. Like daikon, which we had for breakfast, which is great, a lot of nutrients in there. I also know it's a blood cleanser. And stinging nettles is another one. But anyway, it's got a long taproot, brings up all these nutrients. So it not only nourishes itself, but it nourishes other plants in its nearby vicinity. And comfrey, the Latin name of it, means to grow together. And that's what I feel we're doing in Sesshin. We are growing together as a Sangha in this Ango. We are growing together, and we are tapping deep within to find all of these nutrients there. So much richness there in each of us. So we're all comfrey now, growing together. Also, it is good for maladies of the lungs, and lungs in Chinese medicine, I know, has to do with sorrow, with sadness. It's a blood coagulant. You can use it as a poultice for wounds. It heals like bed sores, and it helps with broken bones. So interesting that that comfrey should come up in my dreams. Broken bones, broken hearts, maybe it can mend. Because on Tuesday I was talking about grief, and grief certainly has to do with broken hearts. I remember when my father died, maybe a month later, I just felt like my heart was aching. And I was doing Reiki then, and Reiki, one of the things I do is like over the chakras, I'm balancing chakras. And I just put my hand over my heart area and just started to do this, and it felt so good. It was like my heart was aching, and that Reiki was just kind of helping to soothe it. So I think Americans have a complicated relationship with grief. Right? I talked a little bit about it on Tuesday. Right? Americans are supposed to be strong, and we see grief as being weak, succumbing to emotions. And even in Japanese culture, there's a word called gaman, which means, it's a Japanese terms of Zen Buddhist origin, actually, which means enduring the seemingly unbearable with patience or tolerance. Enduring the seemingly unbearable with patience and dignity, with patience and dignity, gaman. So that was tested for many Japanese during World War II in the internment or concentration camps. That they were all innocent and locked up for 2 to 3 years. Gaman, bearing the unbearable with patience and dignity. Or I know English, what is it? Having a stiff upper lip, right? Like, okay. So it's kind of like we have to unlearn some things here, some ingrained habits. And so Zen Buddhism is very good at that, at being able to look at, this is what I believe in. And, is it something useful? Is it something helpful? Is it something I can change? And we know from our mindfulness work that we can change habits. First, we got to see them, and then we just have to apply ourselves, because our brains are plastic. It can change. We can learn and learn and learn and learn up until the day we die. So one of my Phoenix Project participants is a hospice doctor. And she came to the project because she felt like this was this huge cloud of grief because of COVID, right? Now it's 670,000 deaths in the US. And in the early part of COVID, families couldn't even, go to the bedside of their dying relatives. So she felt like there was this huge grief she wanted to just get a handle on here. And Domyo is talking about, it's like we all have this huge reservoir of grief, that each loss that happens to us, we just kind of add to this reservoir. And it's not like it's ever going to go away. It's just there. But if we can touch into it, it can be healing. Kyogen Carlson, her teacher at Dharma Rain, said, all griefs are one. So there's this huge reservoir, that the good thing about that is if we work on one grief, we're working with all the griefs, and it's not like it's going to go away. I mean, suffering is here. That is our human condition, right? So, what is this about cultivating our capacity to work with grief? It's similar to this training in compassion that all of us, or a lot of us, have studied. Norman Fisher's book, The Teachings on the Practice of Lojong, which is training to be compassionate. It's kind of increasing our ability for compassion, our ability or our capacity for compassion. So I think it's the same thing for grief, actually, increasing our ability to feel it and in that way work with it. Right. Domyo said, getting used to it, being able to live sustainably and honestly with it. Yes, grief hurts. I wonder if it hurts as much as childbirth. That's what I was thinking. Could it? I mean, it hurts. We're really like afraid of it, of grief, a lot of us. I can speak for myself. So how do we integrate it, right? Acknowledge and honor it when it's present. And maybe helping it to inspire our humility and love. So what does it mean to practice with this grief, with our grief? What does that mean? How do we integrate it into our lives in a healthy way, sustainable? So absolutely, we have to be mindful of it when it arises. And it might be there, we might not even notice it because we might have suppressed or repressed it. And also, the whole Buddhist teaching about letting go of attachments, that's important here as well. And the importance of ritual, like we're going to be doing Buddhist services here every Sunday now. Ritual is a wonderful way to tap into grief. And we're doing it now every day during Sesshin, which is fabulous. And I'm so excited to have all the different people doing the positions, like an Christian, hearing his voice, which is wonderful. And then Sky gave the poem, Life Last Night. Everybody, and what I would really like to see is people really getting to know all the positions, trying all the positions, so that you can become adept at all of the positions and be able to fill in, like Roshi and I and Shikan. We can just do whatever position when it's called. It's really, I think it's an important way to serve also, as well as working with our own grief. Yeah, and then appreciating, of course, with the absolute or the formlessness of reality. It's another way to work with our grief. Emptiness, right? How does that grief, everything is empty, the grief is empty, but what does that really mean? It also means it's really present. So I mentioned also Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her 5 steps involved in grief, dealing with death and dying, but this can be in change, losing a position, leaving a position, losing a pet. So they are denial, right? Shock and disbelief that the loss has occurred. Anger that the person that we care about is no longer here. Bargaining, all the what ifs and regrets. Depression, sadness from the loss, and then acceptance, acknowledging the reality of the loss. So it makes sense that we allow ourselves to go through this whole process of grief until we arrive at acceptance. It makes sense. We shouldn't shortcut things just because we think, oh, that's not what an enlightened or awakened Buddhist would do. I think an enlightened or awakened Buddhist would allow, when these things happen, when arise for you, to bear witness to it and to be with it. And then also to notice the story, right? So that's the other thing about working with grief. Can you just feel what your body is going through? Honor the story when it's there, let it be, and then let it go, and then come back to your heart. What is your heart feeling like? What is your belly feeling like? Just really kind of touch in there. It's kind of like getting in touch with the pure sensations and letting go of the story, because the story will just add on. Like in Buddhism, it's that second arrow, right? The first arrow is the lost, and then the second arrow is all the stories you've added on top of the loss. That makes it even more painful. So acceptance is interesting because it doesn't mean that, we still don't hurt and that the loss is no big deal. But no, we're just coming to terms with reality, and yeah, we can still hurt. Right? There's no way around reality in the long run. And now Domyo says that Buddhism promises that facing the truth is always preferable to clinging to delusion or denial. Yeah, that makes sense. And then David Kessler, in his 6th stage of grief, talks about finding meaning. And he explains people who are able to find meaning can experience a much deeper healing. So this practice for us is a great way to tap into our deep reservoirs of grief and of richness to help us to find meaning. I think it's so, I'm just grateful for this practice in that way. So this grief reservoir, been talking about, I can say for me, a lot of my grief was hidden about the death of my father. I really didn't, all out cry, and yet he was so close to me. But now when I read, he wrote this fabulous little short story about his experience as a hunter on Mauna Kea. He was archery hunting with his good friend, Stanley Yasuda, who's on our death list. And he experienced a major heart attack. And it was like dusk. And he was like 3 miles from the car in this rough lava terrain with tall grasses. And he had to find his way back with this crushing pain in his chest. He would stand up, take a few steps, and then fall over in pain. 3 miles he had to. And when he finally came out to the car, his friend Stanley, who they had, he said, the one rule is to not go hunting alone. You should go with a partner, just, which he didn't follow on that last hunt. And so Stanley had actually taken the truck or the Jeep, whatever it was, someplace looking for him, but he couldn't go any farther. He came to the road and he just lay down. He didn't realize where he was. It was dark also. And luckily Stanley came back. So just reading that story, he has a sense of humor. And then I've just been kind of reading and kind of getting in touch with my grief about him again. And thinking about, the last time I saw him, because I was living in Chicago and he was actively dying the last 6 months of his life. So I would get calls like almost every month, he's in the ER, this is it, you better come over. So I would like fly right the next day, and I had a job which was, PTO, and I could leave, and it was very flexible. So it was really very nice. And I was remembering the last time I, saw him and gave him a hug, and then it was like a couple months before his death, and he called me, or I called him, I don't remember, and I talked to him, and he said at the end of the conversation, like he would always end the conversation, he would say, "When you coming home, June?" And I couldn't even answer. I couldn't say anything because I knew I had no more time left. The only time I could go back was at his funeral. So I couldn't even say anything. That was his last words. "When you coming home, June?" So just kind of getting in touch with that grief, grief. Grief is love in the face of loss, right? This is what love looks like. So ritual is really important when it's kind of under the surface. We're chanting these beautiful sutras, the Heart Sutra about form is emptiness, emptiness is form, right? There is no death and there is nothing but death. So there's a reason we do these rituals. All different cultures have death rituals. For a reason is to help us work through our grief. And he wanted Hawaiian music. You know, we have this, hospice has this great thing about 5 wishes, right? You ask the person what would they wish for, and you know, what kind of service do they want? And he said, Hawaiian music, you got to play Hawaiian music at my funeral, okay? And I said, Poliahu. Poliahu is his favorite song. Poliahu is about the snow goddess that lives on Mauna Kea, and that song is about love and heartbreak. Poliahu actually means, Poli is heart, Ahu is like an altar for the heart. And she lives on the top of Mauna Kea, the biggest mountain in the world if you count from under sea level, 32,000 feet elevation. And in the song, she is heartbroken because of a lover who she has fallen in love with, and he was actually betrothed to someone else. But that song is also saying in the refrain, you know, to come back to me, come back to me. It's kind of, you can look at it as a metaphor for returning to nature, to seeing the beauty and the importance of nature in our lives. And even though things are pretty dire out there, just, you know, again, this whole thing about climate change and the grief over climate change and the importance to get through those stages so that we can come to acceptance and then be able to have a clearer head in terms of knowing what we might be able to do to help. And then letting go of attachments, right? So yeah, what does this mean? Does this mean we have to let go of our attachment to our loved one? No, I don't think this means that. In terms of our love for them, we do not have to let go of that, but yes, understanding that the physical body is no longer present. We don't know about spiritual, depending on your faith, right? The soul, spirit just changes to another dimension. So there can be all kinds of attachments, definitely attachments to habits and ways of thinking that we can look at and see that some of these just no longer serve and that we can let go, can let go. And yes, really, remember Mahakashyapa telling the monks when the Buddha died, don't grieve, don't lament. What do you expect? Everything that is born dies. So the teachings in Buddhism is very helpful in terms of attachments and letting go. So a good question to ask ourselves is, when are we experiencing pure love and when is there attachment mixed in? This is a complicated question because I have to say for myself that I really didn't know what pure love was until I was maybe 37 or 38 when I met my husband, Shoshin Roshi now. I was not sure that I really knew what love was all about. I kind of had an idea, but I didn't know. And I've got to say that my relationship with my husband helped me in so many ways to understand what love really means. So I am very grateful to my husband for that.
I also hear a lot about patience.
Also patience. Right. But I knew when I married, well, when I agreed to marry him, that I wanted my partner to be someone who saw me as I was and who loved me for who I was and was able to make a commitment to me, which helped in my commitment to him. So, so this question of love, and any attachments, that's not so easy. When attachments are mixed in, they say when you really love somebody, then you can give that person freedom. It's not a grasping or clinging kind of love. You trust them, they trust you. And you might have to check in every now and then, when you're not sure. But that's a relationship. It's a great communication with one another. In terms of, like, for example, loss of a job, it's not really a loss of a relationship with a person, but you can look at attachments or how you can make things worse when you let go or don't let go. So say, you're feeling grief about the loss of a job. You could compound the pain by dwelling on whether other people are going to lose respect for you because you are now unemployed, right? That can come up. And then there's added pain, not only to the loss of the job, but, everybody's really going to look down on me now because I don't have a job or I don't have that job. So if you can let go of your attachment to what others think, you can certainly relieve some of the suffering. And it's not easy, but that's okay. In our Zen practice, we like not easy things. Right? That. I was reminded about this, right? This is such great training in compassion. So I remember first hearing the word bodhicitta when I went. Roshi was practicing Tibetan Buddhism then, and we went to an all-day. They were chanting, the Tibetans were chanting all day, and this was to generate bodhicitta. And what is bodhicitta? And Roshi told me, I asked him, what is bodhicitta? It's awakened mind heart. Awakened mind heart. It's like an opening of the heart, mind, opening. And that's kind of our practice here. We're trying to open. We practice not knowing. We're opening to the vast possibilities versus our small, limited view. I mean, we're smart, no doubt about it. However, there's so much we don't see. Can we be open to that? And then when we're open to that, we can get kind of overwhelmed and scared because it's like, oh my God, this I'm not used to. So then can we just hang in there and bear witness, just being without judgment, noticing judgment might arise, letting it go, just staying, bearing witness. That's developing compassion, courage to be with not knowing. And then, of course, if you do those two right, like Shikan talked about yesterday, there's this some action will arise that should be, I don't know, should is not a good word, but has compassionate healing qualities. So, can we not be attached to our emotional comfort and safety? That's a big one. Because if we are attached to our emotional comfort and safety, what happens to our hearts then? Attached. I want to be safe here. I am not going to open. No way, Jose. So, if you can let go of that attachment to your own emotional comfort and safety, I think that you can open more to grief. And the Rinzai teacher Yamada Koun Roshi said this about Kensho, which is this awakening that can happen in Zen. This Kensho, this is awakening to your true nature, self-nature. If you cannot weep with a person who is crying, there is no Kensho. So in other words, if you're not able to feel and express normal human emotions in empathy with another person, you aren't enlightened. So it's a process. It's a process. And the process of opening our hearts. I was looking at this, and the very first thing that Norman Fisher says in training to training in compassion is like the first slogan is to train in the preliminaries. So, right, to start opening your heart, you have to train in the preliminaries. And what are the preliminaries? The preliminaries are number one, everything difficult that has happened to you in your life. That's one big preliminary. And the difference between just suffering these things and trying to cope and training has to do with how you view them, with your sense of resolve and personal responsibility. No blaming, right? You're really looking inward here. Not even blaming yourself, just looking inward here. Right, looking at your life and making a firm decision to start walking a spiritual path, disciplined spiritual path. The second preliminary is to practice zazen or meditation regularly, disciplined, and to trust. Sitting regularly on the cushion with your breathing and feeling your body will provide you with the spiritual inspiration and force necessary to set a new process in motion in your life. And then the third preliminary are really meditating on these 4 reflections. The first is about the rarity and preciousness of human life. Just sitting with that, of your life. If you think about how you could have been born a bacteria or an insect, like one of those cicadas, being born human is a rare and precious thing. The second is the absolute inevitability of death. It is going to happen to me. Really? Can it really be true? Well, as I get older, I'm believing it now. The third thing is the awesome and indelible power of our actions. The awesome and indelible power of our actions. Once you set an intention and a commitment to that intention, there is amazing things you can do. And the fourth is the inescapability of suffering. It is our human condition. So the spiritual path is helping to build our capacity for suffering, because it is going to happen if it hasn't already. Right? Loss, disappointment, disrespect, physical pain, old age, and then all those painful, afflictive emotions, jealousy, grief, anger, confusion. So the inevitability of suffering, how do we prepare our minds and hearts to be able to work with, be with, in a kind way and gentle. So I'd like to close with another poem from the first free women, poems of the early Buddhist nuns. Mita, friend. Full of trust, you left home and soon learned to walk the path, making yourself a friend to everyone and making everyone a friend. When the whole world is your friend, fear will find no place to call home. And when you make the mind your friend, you'll know what trust really means. Listen, I have followed this path of friendship to its end, and I can say with absolute certainty, it will lead you home. Growing together, that's us, comfrey plants all. Well, we've got some time for discussion or any questions you might have.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. You had mentioned somewhere in the talk about a sixth stage of grief that had to do with meaning. Could you say something more about that?
Yeah. David Kessler, who I believe has worked with, I'm just gonna get this, kind of, who has worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, is saying if you can find meaning from the loss, some kind of meaning for you, it will help to deepen that healing process from that loss. So what could that be, right? Finding meaning. Yes, that all things die. Yeah. But I think especially maybe in difficult relationships, I think there's a way still to touch into that. And I think through practice, through maybe a psychologist or a therapist, helping you to see how you can let go, and how it was really a learning experience for you. In many ways, you can have a deeper healing in that huge reservoir of grief that I think we all hold. Yeah, I can't say enough about this practice of meditation, zazen, in giving you strength and courage to deal with hard stuff in your life. Because as Buddhist practitioners, I think it's really important to face unpleasant and difficult things, even though, that's the last thing we want to do, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to wallow in it, but just to be able to touch in initially and just bear witness to what's going on there for yourself in a loving, kind way, I think will go a long way in healing. Mending broken hearts. So it's building up our capacity to be with grief. This practice, I think, has helped me deal with, not deal with, but just uncover grief that I think that I really suppressed from a long time ago, because I had an idea that I should not, lose it, basically. I should not lose it. But I missed out, I think, in a very rich experience. But I'm kind of touching in, gently, gently, and letting it bubble up, crying, being able to cry, which I haven't been able to do for a long time.
I'm thinking about this comment you made at the end about the ability to cry with someone who is crying, and that is somehow you have been awakened if you cannot cry with someone who is also crying, if you can't feel that empathy. And I think that's beautiful. I haven't cried in some years, and it would be such an honor to cry with someone, to feel their grief, and to release my own. So that is something I will think about, and as an aspiration.
So that's kind of interesting, so this practice, also what it's doing as you're sitting and you're bearing witness to things, you're kind of softening in a way too. You're kind of letting go of a lot of ideas about everything, right? Our busy brains. And when we can do that, I think then our heart, we can kind of get in touch with our breathing, our breath, our body, and then our hearts as well. And as we're doing that, the heart, I think, is just we're kind of nurturing and cultivating this compassion, which is this openness, opening that is happening, right? So that that you just naturally, so the practice kind of does it. If you can be committed to your practice, really disciplined, that you sit every day if you can, and just really practice coming back to body and breath for a good 20 minutes. I think it takes at least 20 minutes to kind of let go of the busy day. And a lot of times the second 20 minutes is a lot more, not as turbulent, right? And that you can go deeper, tapping into that taproot deep. And when you do that, it's a natural process, I think, of opening your heart, your outlook, being able to be with not knowing, because that's what it is. You're not knowing anything here, you're letting go, and you're trusting the body. So a natural opening starts to happen. The bodhicitta starts to become more evident.
Jackie has a question.
Oh, okay. Well, Christian asked first, and then Jackie, okay?
So something that I've noticed anytime I'm grieving with someone or bearing witness to either a friend or a family member that's crying or going through something is even if what they're going through isn't something that I'm going through, I'm able to see myself in them and see some of the similarities that we share. And sometimes by sitting with someone, working with them through what they're going through, I find it like spiritually nourishing, because just like I'm doing them a favor by being with them, they're also doing me a favor by kind of like what you said, like it's an honor to just be able to share that with someone. So, and I just think that's just a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's like comfrey, together with, right? You're together with. And then compassion is also suffering with, right? Feeling that. Yeah, good. All right, Jackie.
Thank you, Sensei. I just thought of compost as you were saying all these comms and how it's great that we reuse all of our food. That makes me feel good. Thank you for just the softness of you. And, you know, this grief is love in the face of loss. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to stop telling myself to stop sometimes. You know, this idea that when will I stop grieving is really cutting off my understanding of my capacity to love. I'm starting to see from what you said that, you know, how deep is my love? You know, why in some situations do I grieve longer? Perhaps it's the love is deeper. And that's a nice perspective, helpful. And the other thing is when we talk about our culture, I was thinking about FMLA and how, you know, businesses give people, you know, months or weeks off when there's a new baby, when there's birth. And you can take the time off and take the time you need. You know, now both partners can. Just really an honoring of how life changes when there's birth. But then when there's death, you're given like 2 days for a father, 2 days for a mother, 1 day for an aunt. And I can't tell you how many times myself, and I've heard someone say, I'm so not glad, but thank God it's Friday because I have, you know, the weekend, you know, like these extra days, like if someone dies on Wednesday and they think they have 3 days off plus the weekend, and just how we're told in this society that you have a frame of time for grief and then you better get back to it. And I think that's what we've been conditioned to get through it, get over it, and get on with it within 72 hours. And then we believe this thing that if we let it come, we cannot possibly survive. And from your talk, I'm learning that, you know, part of my living well is to not cut off this part of my loving.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really, I do a lot with grief, you know, in my practice, my professional practice. And this is a lovely new piece of perspective for me. Thank you.
Right, that's part of the American, you know, you gotta just get over it, and, you know, go on with your life. Yeah. So. Yeah, and you know, there's something to be said also about, you know, it's such a balance, right? Because I talked on Tuesday a little bit about you can get emotionally stuck also if you are totally, right, just totally attached and cannot even, you know, you cannot even get that the person is dead, right? You totally are so lost in the grief that there's no in touch with reality, right? So that's something to also just be aware of. But in general, I think we have enough of that in our society, our culture, and I think we really need to just get in touch with grief and be okay with it, because it's such a conditioning, right, that we have, that we need to look at and see, is this helpful? And then change. And that change takes effort. It's a new kind of habit or way of being. So it takes effort and discipline. Well, it's so great to be with you in Sesshin. I really am enjoying my Sesshin, and my thanks to all of you for your hard work in this session, hard work on the cushion, hard work doing work, all kinds. Really appreciate that. So onward, continue.